On this Saturday night, the new coronavirus surpasses SARS. More infections and more deaths.
Everyone who wants to come back home can come back home.
As more Canadians wait to get out of China. A soldier in Thailand goes on a shooting spree. The motive behind the deadly rampage. Stiff competition. What Canada faces in the fight for a UN Security Council seat. And finding the right fit.
We always have kind of done unique souls for unique souls.
Two Canadians team up to make the perfect pair.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The new coronavirus outbreak has passed a grim milestone tonight. After a brief respite, the number of new cases has risen again. At least 36,000 people are infected, including 3 more on the quarantined Diamond Princess cruise ship. Chinese authorities say 81 more people have died in China, bringing the death toll to at least 800. That surpasses the 774 deaths recorded globally during the 2002-2003 SARS outbreak. One of the most recent deaths in Wuhan, a U.S. citizen. This 60-year-old is believed to be the first American to die from the new coronavirus. Meanwhile, more than 200 Canadians are under quarantine tonight at CFB Trenton after being airlifted out of China. Dozens more remain in the epicenter of the outbreak, waiting for government help to get home. Couteur explains when they might return to Canada and what they can expect when they get here.
I am prepared for the worst, but I'm hoping for the best.
These are tense times for Amelia Pan. Her husband caught the coronavirus while in Wuhan, China, with their 2-year-old daughter. The toddler missed the first Canadian evacuation flight because she had a fever. She's better now, and Pan is hoping the government will help get her home.
Hopefully they can find somebody to act as a temporary custodian for my daughter, Serena.
It's unclear if the federal government will even consider that. Pan would go get her daughter herself, but no commercial flights are allowed into Wuhan. Meanwhile, the 213 Canadians and those with permanent resident status in quarantine at CFB Trenton are getting used to their new surroundings and routines, which does include a bit of time outside. Movements are still restricted, but for Myriam Larouche, it's better than being in China.
But here, I know that in 14 days, I'm going to be out. I'm going to be with my friends and my family.
Larouche and the others are expected to get some company next week. That's when another 150 Canadian citizens and people with permanent resident status who are still in Wuhan, China, could be airlifted back home on a second government charter.
The time between the last flight and the next one will allow us really to be in touch with everyone, making sure that when our second Canadian plane leaves Wuhan, that everyone who wants to come back home can come back home.
Canadian officials are also keeping an eye on 3 cruise ships in Asia which have been halted, 2 placed in quarantine. According to the different cruise lines, there are more than 550 Canadians on those vessels, and 7 have tested positive for the coronavirus. Those people have been removed and are now in hospital. American Matthew Smith is on the Diamond Princess, and he says the crew has been great, but they've been told the ship's clinic is very busy and they have to monitor themselves.
We were given the thermometers, and the captain asked us to self-test several times a day, and if the temperature was 37.5 centigrade or above, to report to the medical center.
One of the 3 ships isn't being allowed to dock in Japan, even though there are no confirmed cases of the virus on board. Our Foreign Affairs Minister spoke to the CEO of that cruise line and was told that everything is being done to ensure the health and safety of Canadians on board the ship. Robin.
Couture in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike. To breaking news in Thailand, police now say an officer has been killed in a raid at a shopping mall to stop a soldier on a shooting rampage. At least 21 people have been killed and dozens more injured in the attack. It began this afternoon in a city about 250 kilometers northeast of Bangkok. The shooter began his rampage at a military base before moving onto a popular mall. That's where the suspect has been holed up for hours. Tonight, explosions and shots can still be heard as police search the mall for the shooter. Reggie Cicchini reports.
A frantic scene at a shopping mall in Thailand as a suspect stormed the building and began shooting at large. And while many managed to escape with the aid of authorities, an unknown number were trapped inside. We are trying to bring out whoever we can first, and we will gradually save the others who are still stuck inside, says the country's public health minister. The suspect, believed to be a 32-year-old member of the army, was reportedly angry over a land dispute. The incident started on a military base where he allegedly attacked and killed a commanding officer and at least 2 others. He's then alleged to have stolen a vehicle, driving roughly 11 kilometers north to the Terminal 21 shopping center, where he gunned down a number of civilians outside before entering. The suspect can be seen roaming the corridors, armed with a large rifle. I was wondering if he was going to come near me because the noise felt like it was so close while we were hiding, this shopper says. Amid the confusion and chaos, a desperate attempt to get in touch with loved ones. This man, talking to his girlfriend, tells her he heard the gunshots and says, "I told her to calm down, that authorities are coming. That's all I can do." This is the second time this year a mall in Thailand has come under fire. In January, 3 people died during an armed robbery in the city of Lopburi, including a 2-year-old boy. And while gun ownership is legal in the country, mass shootings outside of localized gang violence are rare. Authorities say the suspect in Saturday's shooting used weapons stolen from a military base. His social media sites have been pulled down, but not before he allegedly broadcast himself on Facebook, saying, "I am tired and my fingers hurt." And as hospitals continue to treat victims of this shooting incident, the man who at one time was tasked with serving and protecting his country has become Thailand's most wanted person. Reggie Chikini, Global News.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Ethiopia, where he's campaigning to win support from African nations for Canada's bid to win a Security Council seat. Our chief political correspondent David Akin is traveling with the Prime Minister and reports that Canada isn't the only country campaigning in Africa right now.
The 55 members of the African Union hold a summit twice a year, and at this one, for the very first time, a Canadian Prime Minister addressed the gathering.
Today, as part of Canada's increased support to the African Union, I'm pleased to announce that we will provide $10 million to help build the capacity of the African Union Commission to advance gender equality.
The applause for that promise of $10 million was the start of Justin Trudeau's day. He finished at a panel discussion on the so-called blue economy. Those are economic activities based on ocean and lake resources, reminding his African hosts that 2 years ago, Canada promised to spend $100 million to help rid oceans of plastics and other waste. That's a theme important to African Union voters here.
Canada is ready to be your partner on a blue economy strategy for joint action for people right across Africa.
Those are the kind of financial commitments that are a key part of the campaign that Canada is mounting to win a seat at the United Nations Security Council, a seat that would give Canadian diplomats daily access to senior officials from the world's most powerful countries.
It's even more important right now when we're having trouble negotiating with the Chinese.
Adam Chapnick is the author of A New History of Canada at the Security Council.
We'll be sitting beside them at the Security Council day in, day out for 2 years if we have a seat on the council, and sometimes that's how diplomacy gets done.
But Canada is facing stiff competition from Ireland and Norway for the 2 spots that will come open in June. Indeed, 10 minutes after Trudeau wrapped up a meeting with Ethiopia's President Sahle-Work Zewde, Norway's Prime Minister Erna Solberg pulled up at the presidential palace for her meeting with President Zewde. Norway argues it has been a constant partner for Africa and spends 5 times more on foreign aid, relatively speaking, than Canada does.
Our difficulty now is a bit that we in Canada have a same approach, but maybe we've been a more steady partnership for the multilateralism for a long time.
Now, that's a bit of a dig at a line that Trudeau and his ministers once used to boast about their own foreign policy and criticize the Harper Conservatives. Remember, Canada is back? Well, Norway and Ireland are reminding UN voters that they never left. Robin?
David Akin in Ethiopia. The premiers of New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta are in Washington. They're pursuing trade agreements with individual states in hopes of getting around the Trump administration's stringent Buy American policies. While there, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney took the opportunity to criticize Democratic opponents of the Keystone XL pipeline project. During a joint press conference at the Canadian Embassy, Kenney said some Democratic presidential hopefuls who promised to stop construction of the pipeline expansion are threatening Canada's economic interests.
Why are they prepared to do great economic damage to their closest friend and ally, the most progressive and liberal source of energy on earth, when they don't threaten to ban OPEC imports into the United States? If the United States is not, if Americans are not able to depend more on Canadian energy in the future, guess what? They'll have to depend more on OPEC dictatorship oil.
Kenney says Canada has helped reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by massively expanding liquefied natural gas development and exports. RCMP officers have made more arrests at an encampment in northern BC, where Indigenous groups want to block the construction of a pipeline that would transport liquefied natural gas from Alberta to the BC coast. Global Sarah MacDonald is following the story in northern BC. Sarah?
Robin, this area in northern BC used to be open to members of the public, that is, until Friday, when RCMP expanded its controversial so-called exclusion zone, keeping nearly everybody, save for select individuals and a few members of the media, out.
Do you have anything to say as you're being arrested?
New arrests were conducted on Saturday, with pipeline opponents refusing to vacate, now considered to be in defiance of that injunction RCMP had been tasked with enforcing, as a second criminal investigation is launched for mischief over allegations that crucial infrastructure has been tampered with. The hereditary chiefs of Wet'suwet'en Nation, this large swath of unceded territory outside Houston, BC, say they have ultimate jurisdiction over this land and they don't consent to the $6.6 billion natural gas pipeline slated to run through it, even though the energy giant behind it has all the proper permits to put shovels in the ground and the support of the provincial and federal governments and elected First Nations councils in northern BC.
Well, certainly it's not the outcome we had hoped for or have been working toward over the past number of months.
It's illegal what they're doing. Everyone that they arrested and removed from our territory were never charged. It's just harassment, and they were not impeding any access at all. They were in the homes.
It will likely take days for RCMP to access the main encampment, housing more people staunchly opposed to the pipeline at this point, meaning, Robin, those most recent arrests seen here today are almost certainly not going to be the last.
Sarah MacDonald near Houston, BC.
Would you like to see them move these guys out of here so you can get on with your job?
Yes, I want to move it. I can deliver it and go home. So I don't want stuck here.
In Vancouver, a long line of truckers stalled on a highway off-ramp as protesters who claim to be supporting the Indigenous pipeline opponents blocked access to the Port of Vancouver for a third straight day. The action caused heavy traffic backups, and the Port of Vancouver says some operations were immediately impacted. And anger of the arrests in BC is on display at demonstrations in Ontario. Dozens of protesters crowded onto a Toronto GO Transit line, saying they're putting their bodies on the line for the Wet'suwet'en people. A separate blockade near Belleville, Ontario, has forced Via Rail to cancel trains for a second day on routes operating between Toronto and Montreal and between Toronto and Ottawa. Montreal is digging out after a winter wallop brought 40 centimeters of snow in a day. 3,000 city employees hit the streets in nearly as many snow-clearing vehicles today. It's the fifth major operation of the season. The snowstorm closed all city schools, canceled and delayed dozens of flights, and caused commuter chaos yesterday. Residents across the Maritimes are dealing with the aftermath of that same system. Snow, freezing rain, and strong winds swept across the region yesterday. Thousands of people are still without power in many areas. Down under, they're drenched, coming up from fire to floods in Australia. Fire-ravaged Australia is dealing with a new problem, rain and lots of it. New South Wales was drenched today by the heaviest rainfall in almost 20 years. The severe weather flooded roads, submerging vehicles. There are still more than 35 active fires in the region. About half are contained. The downpours are expected to last until next week, which may dampen the fires. A preliminary investigation is ruling out engine failure in the helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board says there are no signs the rotors or engines failed before the crash, killing all 9 people on board. The report includes witness photographs that show the helicopter disappearing into low cloud cover. Investigators say the chopper nearly cleared the blinding clouds when it suddenly plummeted into a California hillside.
The left bank, which is increasing, and the descent rate may very well be indicators of spatial disorientation. That's certainly what the investigators are going to look at.
No cause has been determined. A final report isn't expected for about a year. A public memorial to remember the NBA legend and his daughter Gianna will take place at Staples Center on February 24th. The date is symbolic because it commemorates both father and daughter's basketball jersey numbers. In Ireland, voters are casting their ballots in an election dominated by anger over health care, a housing crisis, and homelessness. The current leader, known as the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, is fighting for a 3rd consecutive term for his centre-right party. Fine Gael, an opposition party, Fianna Fáil, have dominated Irish politics since independence. The calls for change have seen the third party, Sinn Féin, top opinion polls for the first time. That party doesn't have enough candidates to win a majority, and the other two say they won't form a coalition with Sinn Féin over its past links to the IRA. These patient pumps are part of an election tradition in Ireland. Voters are sharing pictures of their dogs outside of polling stations. You could retire from stressing out about retirement? You're not alone. A recent survey by CIBC found that over 3/4 of Canadians aged 35 to 54 fear they won't have enough money to retire when they want. But that mental block may stall you from saving. In this week's Money 123, online reporter Erica Lini shares ways to turn procrastination into motivation.
Retirement is a very big goal that is also very far off in the future when you're young. Research shows the human brain isn't very good at dealing with that. It's so easy to keep putting it off and so hard to stay on track. But here are 2 ways to help your brain along. If you can't get motivated to start saving, take a look at the numbers. Postponing saving for retirement for even a few years can make a big difference. Let's say you start saving $500 a month at age 30 with 4% average annual returns on your investments. By age 65, you'd have just about $450,000. But if you started saving only 5 years later, at 35, your nest egg at 65 would be $343,000, more than $100,000 less. That's because the earlier you start saving and investing, the longer your money has to grow. But getting started is just one of the problems. The other challenge is to keep going. One strategy to stay motivated is to give yourself intermediate, shorter-term retirement goals. For example, how much do you want to have saved up by 30? And by 35? Some say by age 30, you should have the equivalent of 50% of your salary set aside for retirement. And by 35, the equivalent of 100% of your salary.
The advantage of setting short-term intermediate targets when it comes to saving for retirement is it gives you a much more tangible and smaller number to work with. When it comes to setting your savings targets for retirement, it's important to remember where you're starting from. If you spent a lot of time in school pursuing a graduate or professional degree, you might have more debt and also have spent more time out of the workforce. So don't beat yourself up if you feel behind. It's really just important that you start now and save something.
Don't get discouraged if those targets seem high. It's absolutely possible to catch up. But while it's never too late to start saving for retirement, it's also never too early. That's your Money 123 for this week. I'm Erica Alini.
Kind-hearted kicks. Up next, the unique souls designed to pump up one unique soul. You don't have to walk a mile in someone else's shoes to know one size doesn't fit all. A Calgary woman who lives with cerebral palsy knows that all too well. So when she reached out to a Canadian company known for its fashionable footwear, she found herself in her own Cinderella story. Gill Couture reports.
It's the kind of thing that really makes a statement, fashionable footwear. And that inclination to have the perfect pair is universal.
As a self-esteem thing, to wear something like this is a huge boost.
Shoes aren't one size fits all, and when you're drawn to a certain style, there should be no limits. But for Darby Lee Young, there are.
My gait, I drag my toes. So for me to wear shoes, they last anywhere between a week to a month to even a day.
She lives with cerebral palsy and approached Canadian shoe designer John Fluvog. The company is known for making its mark in a real edgy way. Staff wanted to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, and it was more than just a metaphor.
Alison Fluvog actually wrote me back and said, "Hey, we love your story. Thanks so much, but how about we make you a pair instead?" Kind of went, "What?" And then she said, "Oh, and by the way, we're going to call them the Darby and sell them throughout all our stores." I'm like, oh my God.
For the past 2 years, designers collaborated with her to create a shoe with a sturdy rubber sole. It's removable and easier to repair. The two styles hit the stores in their 2020 spring collection.
Unreal. Unreal. It's in my wildest dreams. Never, sorry. For me, it showed that somebody actually listens and understands that people with disabilities have great differences when it comes to shoes especially, and people have actually commented across the world. Now we know who the Darby is behind the Darbys at Fluvog.
We always have kind of done unique soles for unique soles, and so our design team kind of went back and forth with her. Well, this is something that kind of would work really well and fit what you're asking. So let's go back and forth in terms of colors, different little bits and elements that will make this a little bit more uniquely you.
And now when Darby slips on her trademark shoe, she admits there's a little something extra in the way she walks.
My mother always taught me that if people are going to stare, you might as well look good doing it.
Gill, Global News.
What a lovely story. That is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Lake Louise, Alberta. We would love to see your corner of this country, so email your pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.